Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Moorcroft. I'm head of the consumer sector at Eversheds Sutherland, and today I'm talking to Paul Verrico, who's a partner in our health and safety team. Hi, Paul.
Hi, how are we doing?
Good. So we've had a massive guidance from the government recently about steps to take post-lockdown. Is that you've been wading through that? Is it clear?
It's clearer than other guidance that we've seen in the past. I think one of the things that we've seen is that there are lots of different interpretations of the guidance, some of which have been quite self-serving. So it's quite important to kind of burrow down into the detail and make sure that what you're looking at is actually what's in the guidance rather than someone's opinion of the guidance.
And I suppose a lot of the operators have been, distribution centres have been open, and a fair few of the stores have been open. We know that, or we hope that a lot of the other stores will be opening in July. But is the guidance that's been produced? I mean, is it kind of fit for purpose? Because I'm very conscious that you obviously got big distribution centres, you've got small shops out of town, retail.
Yeah, I think what the guidance kind of does is it reminds employers that they are the best people to determine how to run their operation, and it sets out a number of steps that good employers should take, and it also looks at what the alternatives are if, for instance, it's not possible to socially distance to 2 meters, and some of the other precautions that might be taken instead. And those would include things including changing and staggering work patterns in distribution centres, and quite clearly there's a push towards limiting the number of consumers or customers who might attend retail outlets to make sure that as far as possible both the customers and the staff are protected.
Okay, and how's it going to be policed and regulated? You've got any kind of sense of how proactive the regulation will be?
It's really interesting. I was just on a call earlier today with the general counsel of one of our clients who was concerned about the extent to which his staff would be expected to police government guidelines. And of course, the rules on this and social distancing are not things that a shop worker, for instance, should be expected to police.
Yeah.
The reality is that there is a regulator in the UK, the Health and Safety Executive, and in the case of retail, there's also the local authority who normally will regulate those kind of industries. And those two, in a twin approach, are there to ensure that organisations are doing their bit. But when it comes to taking precautions on the ground, it's for the employer to do their bit, to do their risk assessment, and potentially to add extra precautions in. But it's going to be very difficult to interfere in people's individual liberties if they choose not to obey social distancing or to follow some of the other guidelines that the government has put forward.
So do you think the local authorities will be getting involved at all? Or?
Well, there was a statement that came out from the Health and Safety Executive today in which they talk about the fact that they are moving back into more of a business as usual perspective. And we've got to assume the local authorities will be the same. And what they say is they will return to doing inspections in high risk industries. Clearly retail isn't one of those industries, but they will act upon the usual very serious incidents, including specifically situations in which COVID-19 guidelines have been deliberately ignored. So there's certainly a noise from the regulator that it is interested, and we should expect that to be mirrored through the local authority pyramid as well.
Okay, and I think you were saying that there's been a lot of complaints already. I mean, there's certainly been a lot of press, hasn't there? And a lot of stories and a lot of noise or a lot of involvement from the trade unions.
I think that's exactly right. We know that between the end of February and the start of May, there have been about 7,000 complaints that the Health and Safety Executive has recorded. And of course, over the majority of that time, major shopping centres have been closed, and most people, or many people, have been furloughed. So as a result of that, the numbers of complaints we anticipate will grow quite significantly as people go back into a new normal environment. What does that mean in terms of actual activity levels on the ground? Well, the health and safety executive actually had stopped their inspectors from going out because they were concerned about their own health and safety, quite rightly.
Yeah.
There've been a lot of complaints that have been followed up by way of verbal requests, phone calls, and requests to see evidence. Certainly, I've seen on the BBC a number of distribution centres have been called out, some of which I understand quite unfairly so. And of course, these things are very easy to use as a political hot potato by the unions. And it's important that a degree of sense and calm is put to proceedings, particularly when guidance isn't law, and it's people are trying to do the right things, and sometimes adopting market leading practices, which can look very bad through a wide angle lens.
I'm struggling to really get my head around how this is going to work in the context of, the high street and smaller stores. You can see, distribution centres and larger out of town retail. It's obviously going to be challenging enough, but how on earth do you make it work when you've got a relatively small shop front?
It's interesting. I live in a small town with a news agent. So it's got a sign on the door in handwriting that says no more than 2 people allowed in at any one time. It's impossible to see whether there's 2 people in or not until you're actually through the threshold. And that's kind of just illustrative on a much smaller scale of the issues facing retailers. Certainly the kind of the curveball that maybe we weren't expecting is that the government has changed its guidance on face coverings. And that's something that is effectively a new measure in the UK that we've never seen or grown used to, as of course those who've travelled to Asia will be much more used to seeing that kind of as a daily aspect of normal life. It might just be worth spending a few minutes just talking about that, Paul.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
There's been a great deal of press I've seen that says that people need to wear face masks, and that retailers and employers should have personal protective equipment or respiratory protective equipment. And that's actually not what the guidance says. It says that you or I could wear a scarf or a hood, or just put a sleeve across our mouth as an example of a face covering. It's not anticipating that retailers start supplying fully face-fitted masks to their staff to keep them safe. And that's quite a crucial distinction in terms of A, the amount of protection it provides, and B, kind of the associated training, etc., that would be required if everyone had to have a face-fit mask. And it really is there to try and ensure that people are controlling the likely spread of any symptoms that they may have.
I guess was that the biggest surprise, or was there any others?
Well, I guess in some ways, and also the fact that organisations are to produce a risk assessment they've got to put on their website, which I think was quite a surprise as to an extra value of what's required. I think the face covering thing is particularly interesting because, of course, it lends itself to what if, and kind of the what if scenario is a supermarket or large store has a number of people who want to enter who don't want to wear a face covering. We've certainly seen in America, for instance, that there's been I suppose you could almost call it a conspiracy theory that COVID-19 is manufactured government propaganda, and there's been a number of people who have rebelled against that and won't wear masks. And while we've certainly not seen that degree of resistance in the UK, it is likely that there will be a number of people, a minority, who will resist wanting to wear a mask in a public place. So then you're into the vexed position, and it's got to be risk assessed. What do you do if Paul Moorcroft and Paul Verrico want to go shopping and don't want to wear a face mask? Do you stop us entering the store? I
thought you were going to mention that the US case where the security guard got shot, but
well, that's an extreme outlier, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think you and I talked about this last week, and I think we were both completely shocked at the casual disdain for human life from a man who was trying to do his job, as we understand it. Someone didn't like being told what to do, and returned to the store and very tragically took his life. Again, clearly part of that might be rooted in the culture of the States in terms of the availability of guns compared to here. But we've got to be thinking in any risk assessment, what do you do if someone turns nasty or aggressive? and how do you try and counter that? And I think for retailers in particular, if they've got heavy footfall and maybe 1,000, 3,000, 5,000 customers a day, and they've got a security guard maybe stopping people coming in, then you've really got to think about that potential aggression piece.
And the whole cost of this potentially adds up, and it's quite significant, isn't it? Because I was talking to a client, he was saying that the cost of the perspex is quite expensive across the whole portfolio, and then you add, I suppose, security guards in and other measures, and it all adds up.
Yeah, I think there are a number of things that we've learned over the pandemic, that if you and I had bought shares in Zoom or perspex companies, we'd probably done quite well if we'd done that in January. And of course, these kind of materials have become rarer to get. Hand sanitizer, disinfectant, even thermal imaging camera companies are all quite rightly making the most of the situation, and those kind of supplies are in quite short supply. So these kind of costs, of course, ultimately have to find their way to someone, and ultimately that tends to be the consumer.
Do you think there's any benefit in clients taking legal, this isn't a loaded question, but taking legal advice on these measures before? I mean, I think you were saying last week that you hadn't given much advice to clients on the issues yet, but there seems to be a lot of kind of litigation and potential contentious issues flying out the back end.
Yeah, I think what we've found is there was a lot of requests in the first couple of weeks of the pandemic as to trying to move people into a home-based environment, and our employment teams had lots of work on furlough and the like.
Yeah.
Now we're moving into this kind of business as normal return to work piece. People are very nervous about getting the risk assessment right, and so members of the team have been helping, and I've seen 5 or 6 requests today in relation to helping on risk assessments for organisations across various sectors. I think that the other area that people are concerned about is the COVID tracing app. So what's the situation if I'm a retailer and I've taken some measures, but then somebody gets poorly or even, potentially even succumbs to the disease, and it's likely that they've sustained contact in my store? Can I be sued? And that's an area that we've seen a lot of people concerned, quite rightly, about, to make sure that the measures that they are indicating kind of are a leading practice in the industry.
And do you anticipate that those inquiries will just keep going through July and all the way through, the next few months? Or
well, I think what's interesting is that a number of the trade bodies, the retail trusts and others, for instance, are putting guidance out there now to their members. And what we tend to see is that there's a week or two of concern, kind of idea mapping, and people kind of getting to grips with what might be best. And those kind of practices, and it's quite heartening at times, like, to see those kind of practices get shared and adopted by other retailers and organisations. So I think a lot of people are getting their heads around what it will look like. And of course, there will be teething problems when things go live at the start of July. But I would imagine that by the 2nd or 3rd week of July, it will all become much more than it now is.
Okay, well, great to talk to you. No doubt we'll pick it up in a few weeks' time.
Always a pleasure. I'll let you know what's happening.
Okay. Thanks.
Cheers.